Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Ramona ji, welcome to Channel Y Radio Y. Thank you for joining us. We are covering Indian elections, Indian province elections. There were 5 states elections, so there are being transformations, there are being new governments formation, and new film star in south of India getting first on his election is becoming the premier of the state. Thank you for joining us, Ji Ramona ji.
It's great to be here, Arvindji. Hello and welcome to Y Media Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh. I'm going to bring you the latest development on the U.S.-Israel-Iran war, as well as what it means for gas prices here in Canada. And Prime Minister Mark Carney, well, he's overseas. He joins the European Political Community Summit in Armenia, and he is the first Canadian to join this summit as a non-EU participant. And the latest announcements today, Ottawa is making rounds. It announced $1 billion loan program for steel, aluminum businesses that have been hit by the Trump tariffs. And there's much more to cover today. Essentially, we're going to go into detail. If you've seen your gas prices lately as you drive around the GTA, and perhaps you're seeing one place that's a few cents less or 10 cents more, or sometimes 15 to 20 cents. I've seen that. I've actually had to do a U-turn to turn into a gas station that was 20 cents cheaper than all the other stations. And I actually had a friend of mine who drove into a gas station, did the U-turn, drove into a gas station. As soon as he put the pump in his car, essentially the handle of the gas pump in his vehicle, then the price went up significantly by 10 cents. So this is rapidly changing. So it's no longer like it used to be before, where you have, the price of the day. And if you're able to do it before, nighttime, you can catch that rate. This is a massively fluctuating situation when it comes to gas prices. And essentially, it has a lot to do with what we're seeing take place in the Middle East, that a war that started on February 28th, where you had U.S. and Israeli forces attack Iran, assassinating the Ayatollah, as well as high caliber people in the Iranian regime. And essentially, it launched off the big war. So we've seen that there's been a ceasefire since April 7th, but a lot has shifted from the ceasefire talk that took place about almost a month ago. We've seen a few escalations, and now things have changed significantly. So let me catch you up on what's happening today. Essentially, last week we heard that Iran sent a list of their demands for end of the war peace talks. And to that, we had President Trump say that he's not yet satisfied with Iran's proposal. So just to go over what this proposal is by Iran. Essentially, there are 14 points they put out for end of the war plan. The first one being that they want this immediate ceasefire that would be permanent and all hostilities across Iran, Lebanon, and the broader regional fronts, right? We know that since the war began early March, Israel and Lebanon have been at it with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israeli forces have essentially started their occupation of southern Lebanon. So we're seeing that still escalate, even though they've been in a ceasefire that was announced by President Trump. It was supposed to hold for about 3 weeks. The escalation still continues. So another point that Iran had put forward to President Trump is to withdraw the U.S. forces and leave Iran. Essentially, we know in the last couple of weeks that the U.S. Naval ships have been blocking the Iranian port, preventing Iran from trade. And the other item that Iran has requested in this proposal to President Trump is essentially a full removal of U.S. economic sanctions and restoring Iran's global economic access. We know that sanctions have been placed on Iran for a better of 50 years. And this was one of the criteria that Iran had asked for, especially in that 10-point items that it had sent to the president to review to have that ceasefire take place. We know that there was one meeting with the U.S. delegation as well as Iran that was led by Vice President J.D. Vance. They didn't really come to an agreement on that term. second round was supposed to be held. Well, it wasn't a date that was set. Essentially, the news carried that the Iranian's foreign affairs minister Arafchi was taking a trip to Pakistan, and that's when President Trump said he was going to send his entourage, his people such as Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, to come and sit down for a second round of talks. But Iran said there was no scheduled round of talks, and we saw the foreign affairs minister Arafchi leave Pakistan. So then President Trump canceled that flight. So we know that there hasn't been a second round of meetings, but essentially the first one, they didn't come to an agreement because there was a red line drawn by the United States, as in no enrichment of uranium for 20 years. And this was a hard line that was drawn, that not even for civilian purposes. And this is where things stalled. Now, Iran has gone back with this new points on its end of war peace plan. And another item is that it wants to release the frozen assets. Essentially, there's billions in Iranian funds held abroad, and it wants it returned immediately. The other item is the war compensation that expects reparations for damages from the United States, given that they say that they were under negotiations with the United States on Iran's nuclear program and lack thereof, and enrichment of uranium. And to that, the war started. That was, in the middle of negotiations. So they're saying, the war that started wasn't warranted, and therefore there needs to be reparations paid for the damages caused. And I guess the biggest item that has been, that the world's been watching and has been affected by, is the blockade around the Strait of Hormuz. Essentially, Iran is saying that the U.S. must lift naval pressures, leave the area, leave the Iranian port, restore normal shipping. And essentially, Iran is proposing that it wants to now, implement a new system where it manages the Strait of Hormuz, and wants the United States to essentially buy into it as part of this peace agreement. Now, the United States is saying that, these are a lot of things that Iran is asking for. And Iran's also saying that the U.S. must commit to no future attacks on Iran, essentially saying that, this should be the last item after the 12-day war. If you recall last year, then you had almost, a 5-week war this year. So this was part of the front to have no more future attacks. And then there's the regional de-escalation of what we're seeing in the proxy fronts with Hezbollah as a proxy of Iran, and having that conflict end in Lebanon. So essentially, the structure of the plan is, the timeline is about 30 days to resolve these core issues. And it's proposed it into like a multi-phase approach, such as the ceasefire, stabilization, to make sure it continues and doesn't escalate, and to go into the negotiation phase, and then the final settlement on some of those points. Now, one major thing that it is not part of this proposal is that, Iran did in the initial meetings say that it would agree to perhaps 3 to 5 year term of no enrichment of uranium, which would essentially take it to the end of President Trump's presidency. So that has essentially been negotiated on, and this is where U.S. is saying that no, we need to address this, threshold of zero enrichment of uranium first. And then this is why President Trump says he's not satisfied, and then essentially go and target all the other items Iran is proposing. So this is a shift in terms of the proposal, whereas Iran's strategy is to end the economic pressure, remove the sanctions, remove the blockade, and then, and then position Iran as the regional influence by being in control of the Strait of Hormuz. Whereas the U.S. is saying, no, it needs to maintain its leverage, enforce nuclear limits. And essentially, this is, President Trump has to show why he started this war to begin with. And this would be a massive win for him if he's able to secure that with Iran. So on both sides, there seems to be that stalemate. And a deal would essentially mean that there'd be global economic relief, such as what we're seeing with the gas prices, as 20% of the world's oil comes out of the Strait of Hormuz, which has been a major part of this conflict. And when there's no deal, essentially there is prolonged instability in the region. So now we are seeing some shifts take place today, where essentially Iran is signaling that is actively preparing for potential military escalations during this tension with the United States in the Strait of Hormuz. A few things have shifted in terms of some escalatory movements from Iran's side. Essentially, Iran has warned it will attack U.S. forces if they enter the waterway, because President Trump announced today that he would essentially guide naval ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And then there was more clearance made that no, it doesn't mean there's going to be more U.S. personnel and vessels. It just means it's going to guide in terms of give information of which way to go. So this is, and we know Iran has now escalated its pressure on the Strait of Hormuz. So this is, the U.S. did launch its naval operations called Project Freedom to essentially guide ships through the strait. But to this, Iran is showing a lot more pushback on this entire thing. And so this standoff is switching, very quickly to what would be an active military preparation phase. We know that UAE essentially had one of their vessels attacked, so, and they have made very clear announcements of that. So if you just want to go over what's happened so far, right? So you have the Strait of Hormuz. It's been blocked now for a little over 2 months. Hundreds of ships used to go through the Strait of Hormuz daily. Now we have hundreds of ships that are stranded. And Iran is demanding that all ships must coordinate with Iran. Meanwhile, the president is saying that, the U.S. will actively give information on how to guide these ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So this is, again, it's a standoff. We've seen, hundreds of ships stranded. That means thousands of crew members impacted on these ships. We know that oil prices are skyrocketing as the market does react, and that's why we're seeing it in our neighborhoods, things fluctuating, which essentially will add up to the price of goods at the grocery store. So, and in this two months of this war, Iran has essentially blocked nearly all shipping into and out of the Gulf region, which has affected the GCC countries when it comes to their production and their output of their oil. So this is a massive thing when it comes to the control of the Strait of Hormuz, which essentially means it controls oil and shipping way, right? For 20% of the world's access to the area that relies on oil. So this is massive on both sides. The naval confrontation is extremely high. As Iranian state media has said that it has struck 2 U.S. naval ships. The U.S. has denied anything of that mattering of occurring. So this is, there's a conflict on what's been announced in the media today. But, one side is saying U.S. naval ships have been attacked. The U.S. is saying no such thing has occurred. Meanwhile, the GCC countries are condemning Iranian attacks on UAE oil tankers. So this happened earlier today, and to that, Secretary General of Gulf Cooperation Council of the GCC, his name is Jassim Mohammed Al-Badwawi. He announced that it's the strongest terms that Iranian attack on Emirati oil tanker during the transit in the Strait of Hormuz. What he said is that it's like piracy, and that Iran should stop immediately. So Iran has now escalated its response to the GCC nations like it did prior to April 7th's ceasefire. So this escalation to its neighbors is a warning that it's going to escalate the situation unless President Trump, I guess, comes to some term on the negotiations. So we went through a period of stalemate between the two countries, and essentially no end date to the war, and no peace plan, and essentially no end to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And now this escalation looks like it might either restart things or perhaps get everybody down to the table for a second round of talks. Now, the UAE has intercepted what they say 3 missiles fired from Iran over its territorial waters, with a 4th one crashing into the sea. The Gulf County's defense minister said that this was the first report of Iranian attacks since the ceasefire, since last month. The civil defense team was deployed from the UAE and immediately contained what they said was a blaze at the Fujairah location. And so to this, essentially the statement by the GCC website is been posted today that the continuation of these brutal Iranian attacks by targeting ships passing through the strait is piracy and serious extortion of security of sea lanes and strait. Essentially saying that they're in full solidarity with the UAE. Even Qatar made a statement about this as well, that they condemn Iran's actions. So perhaps this is to, create some sort of pressure on the United States to come to table and to end this war. We know that the UAE essentially left OPEC as of May 1st. Which means that they're under no more restrictions in terms of their production capability of oil as well as pricing. So this is happening, back to back. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the U.S. is looking to see whether China will be engaged in diplomatic efforts to pressure Iran to open up the Strait of Hormuz, and we saw that happen with his interview with Fox News as a major thing for him to announce. And, President Trump is saying essentially he's fed up with no deal and no war stalemate and with Iran. So we're seeing this kind of escalation take place. Now, President Trump, has said that he's going to help navigate the different vessels through the area. And to that, you had CENTCOM, which essentially, is there in the Seaway, which is the U.S. military support. They did say that what they could do is they can essentially increase by 15,000 troop members and essentially cover 100 land and sea-based aircraft. So that, and with warships and drones, so CENTCOM has said they're ready to do that. But this is a very moving, delicate situation in terms of where this could go and how this could proceed. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back, and we'll continue the news from the newsroom.